Oh, y'all remembered.
Yep, got it this time.
All right.
Hopefully Jim will be back.
Yeah, we'll give him a minute.
There he is.
Right. All right, nothing blew up while I was away. Yes, my mother-in-law just got out of the hospital, so they always send a follow-up care nurse. It's just what they do here at Wellstar. So we have the billing address, which is our house, and then they have the patient's address, right? And they always come to the billing address. They never go to the address that's actually listed. So I'm like, do you have the other address on file? Uh-huh. Okay. How would you go to the one labeled patient address? I don't say it like that. I mean, it's billing address and patient address. Go to the one that says patient. That's probably where they are.
Details.
Which is mostly for me aggravating because I get those. I'm gonna get like 2 or 3 of those. Now I didn't realize they were gonna come today. This is the same thing, just open twice. Why is it open twice? That makes no sense. I don't think that one needs to be open then. Yeah, here we go. We can do this. All right, so we can do champagne versus cava later. All right. I'm going to get into the chapters a little bit, get some training additional going here. I wolfed down a bagel. Not the best thing in the world for you, but it definitely satisfied my hunger. So, laser pointer. Here we go. Why am I stuck on a slide? That makes no sense. There we go. All right. All right, this is killing me. It behaves differently every single time. So we talked about the PLS just a little while ago. So the OPLS is identical to PLS. So it's, again, just trying to going to the DMV and thinking. If you do it, you've already lost the game. So don't overthink this one, okay? So we're going to show you how to create those models, how to understand those. It's identical to PLS, to PCA, excuse me. So we already know how to do this. We just reviewed it. So this should only be like 2 slides we need to pay attention to. All right. So the thing that we're doing here is we do have our original model space here. So this is our original X space. We create a new model that predicts our Y space. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bring in that new data set. As we saw a little while ago, we can bring in that new data set, and we're going to go ahead and predict our new Y value. So this is something the model has not seen. So it goes back into the same model. It predicts a Y based upon the original X space that we created it from, and we get our predicted Y. So the inputs are going to be any of your pHs, temperatures, all that fun stuff, spectral data, any additional processing data, speeds of a line, etc. Any chemical composition. So if you have concentrations of something, we can use all that to help output your yield, purity, whatever you're trying to get accomplished, metrology, measurement of something else, right? We're using it all over the place. So we use it for calibration. So that's using like spectroscopy or predicting titer from the process parameters, or in your case, yield in a reaction of some sort. That would all be multivariate calibration. We use it then and predict a quality parameter. Whatever that we just predicted is probably the quality parameter of interest. So we're going to go ahead and predict that. We can then understand relationships between your materials, processes, etc. That will start getting into, we saw the PLSDA, OPLSDA, so this will start to get into that separation techniques as well, which is something you've been using but maybe don't fully understand yet. We'll hopefully cover that shortly. It definitely will help us troubleshoot when something went wonky. So we saw that the pressure is all over the place. Not sure what's going on. So what you do is you just simply make pressure equal to the Y. What variable is causing the pressure that is wonky to what can help explain it? What else is varying in the process that can explain that wonky variable? Just make that wonky variable equal to the Y and see what you can predict. And that will kind of help you very quickly identify what is most likely causing that variable to adjust itself or change or be wonky. And lastly, OPLS can really be used to help with biomarkers, comparisons between locations or sites, or batch A versus batch B ran differently. What's the difference, etc. That's the OPLS DA that you've been messing around with. So when we come to OPLS, we have one name change. We actually add one additional column called M, as in Mary is added. Those are your Y variables, or basically your dependent variables. So we have our independents will then predict our dependent. They can all be added originally as X's, and then we can go ahead and predict, make one of them equal to a Y. Not a problem. Everything else stays the same. So in this case, if we looked at the diastolic blood pressure, I now want to predict my diastolic blood pressure. Okay, I'm not just trying to predict particle size or batch or something like that. All right, so if you remember, I mentioned before, it was probably last time we spoke, PLS is basically a simplification of the OPLS is the simplification of the PLS method. So it's designed to help us visually as well as more sensibly make estimates as to what the variables are doing. So if you're familiar with a regular PLS method, you're going to have three different vectors. They are not necessarily, they're all going to be orthogonal to each other, but they're going to have overlap. The OPLS removes the overlap by making them line up completely. So they are 100% overlapped with each other. So we have a single direction for the prediction value. What that allows us to do is interpret. Instead of having three principal component analysis or three principal components loading to create a single Y variable, we only going to have a single one. So it just makes the interpretation a lot easier because we can go back out and start using our regular PCA techniques that we've learned before. So the only difference is that the x-axis is now predicting my Y. The rest of it is just a PCA space. So that's the beautiful part about OPLS, and it's really recommended, even though the computational power is redunculously higher to calculate. That redunculousness is definitely worth it for the interpretation portion of it. Now, they only came out in about the 1990s is when it was, the concept was created earlier, but the application only came out in the 90s when computational power caught up to. So OPLS up until about 5-6 years ago when I first started using it was very chunky, and computational power has made it much, 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 much nicer. So we now basically default to OPLS because PLS is no longer really needed. OPLS can do the same thing, and because the computational power takes the same amount of time, a fraction of a second. So there's no more, fraction of a second versus like a 20-second wait. It's now the same computational time because, again, PC power just caught up. So now we're just throwing bigger and bigger data sets at it, which will slow any process down. So PLS versus OPLS doesn't really take much difference in time anymore. So I'm trying to get across. So what we're going to be able to do here is, because we've rotated the prediction variable onto the x-axis, we now have all of our, in this case, lower diastolic blood pressures will be on the left. All of our higher diastolic blood pressures will be towards the right. And then we can also then start to interpret which factors are actually able to help us explain the variation we see in the y. Remember, we don't give a rat's banana what the pressure is. We only care about the variation associated with it. So what variations can help me explain the variation of my diastolic blood pressure? Well, systolic is very close, and clearly that will help us. Age, we already saw from the PCA, can help us explain diastolic. So we can clearly predict the diastolic basically probably just on those two values alone. We'll get some additional help from the physiotherapy, but the rest of these really aren't going to do much for us. I can hear your little brains churning, and I don't smell the smoke yet because it hasn't had a chance to come up this direction, but that does not mean you can get rid of these variables. What's nice, though, is that when you do OPLS, you can do a monitoring model at the same time you're predicting something. So I can predict my outcome, and I can go back and double check that all my correlations are where they need to be. And it's very easy to interpret what's happening. So when I have a D mod X or something really wonky going on, I can immediately identify what's happening. So let's go figure out how all that works. So it's really a nice, powerful tool. OPLS really is a nice way to do it. We'll get to that in a moment.
Just to clarify, that just allows one Y, right? In this case, since we're rotating it toward that one, can't do multiple Ys at once, right?
As far as you know, yes, one Y.
In
One
this,
OPLS,
in this
one Y.
method right now, yeah. Okay, gotcha.
You can do it with more than one Y, but there are a lot of exceptions that you have to follow.
Yep.
So you're better off just having one Y, one model.
Sure.
You really, really are. There are, of course, ways to do more, and I don't want to get into them because they're really confusing even for me.
Yep. No worries. I just wanted to make sure I limited to one at this point. So,
yep. Only
cool.
one. Only one. All right, so we're going to look at the two different blocks of data. So we have our X space, which is going to be independent, and we're going to try to predict our dependent variable. Not technically correct, but go with me on that one. And then we have the orthogonal partial least squares as an improvement. Basically, it just goes ahead and orientates everything into a single direction. So scaling and pre-processing can be done for both the X and the Y individually, and in fact, they usually are. Default scaling for both X and the Y is the UV, which we'll discuss in a moment. And then we can do additional transforms, etc., as needed, as it has been described. So for the UV scaling and centering, I have my original X space. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to center my X space. And then I'm left with these are different centers. So this is the pre-centered here. If I center it, I don't know why they have this. This is a horrible representation. I can see here that my stir speed is going to be way more important than my pH. That's not going to be true, of course. So what we ended up doing is I take the variation associated around my stir speed and I divide it by the standard deviation. So I center everything and divide by the standard deviation, and I'm left with basically standard deviation units. So I now have how many standard deviation units away from the center are my variables. So I really, again, don't care what the values are. I just care about the variation associated with that particular variable. That's it. So I'm only going to be comparing standard deviation units. It allows me to compare temperature, stir speed, temperature, pH, I don't know, something else. And that allows us to then put everything onto the same scale because there is no more units. They're all just standard deviations. Last time I checked, that's not a unit. Right. So it's basically unitless at that point in time. So if we didn't explain that before, which you know we didn't, that is what we end up doing to the data behind the scenes. So we ultimately, again, don't care what the values are. We only care about how they vary, and we use the variations in standard deviation units. And so here I have my original X space, and I'm now going to use this space, these three variables here to explain this one Y over here. A fairly straightforward concept, I hope. There's a couple of missed opportunities, so I'm going to stick with the green dot. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So this is the same observation in the X space. So my X space has a defined Y. not who, what, where, when, and why, but a new y as in the dependent. So this x space is going to predict that y value. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how far away we are from the center. So we're going to have our distance here, and we're going to have our distance here, right? So this is going to be in the score space. So I now have my score. This really should be to the green one. I have my score here. And then I have my u. It's just the distance from the center. Again, they missed the opportunity for the green. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot my u1, which is my y value. And I'm going to plot my score. So if I'm negative in my score, I'll have a lower u. If I'm positive in my score, I'll have a higher u. That's just how that ends up working out. Now, the only tricky part, okay, is this is found iteratively. So it just makes a WAG, and it goes ahead and figures out the first component, second component, third component, until it figures out the PLS spaces that it needs, rotates all of them. That then creates that first component. So what it does is mathematically in the background, it figures out the first PLS component, okay? And it goes, okay, that first PLS component is now going to predict as much as that Y space as it humanly can. And how it checks that is it checks it by how well is this R square fitting here. So it's going to go out and find that first PCA vector, and it's going to go, how well did it fit here? Probably not all that well, to be blunt, right? But maybe you got lucky. Okay. Then what it's going to do, it's going to look at the residuals. There's a bunch of math in the background, and it goes, okay, I now need to rotate it over here. It then continues to rotate until it finds that first PC here that fits this U space the best. It locks that direction in. Okay. That now becomes your first that becomes your first vector of your principal component. Okay. Then what it does is it then, go ahead.
Sorry, just to clarify. So originally it was the first principal component matched the most variation, direction of the most variation, right? In this case, since we have a y variable, we're trying to get something close to that. And that's
Correct.
what we're trying to do essentially.
Yep.
Okay. All right, cool.
So what it does originally is it's going to go out and find the original PLS vector. So the partial least squares vector.
Yep.
Okay. It locks that in. Then it goes out and it finds the next available vector, which will be the second PLS vector. Okay. Once it finds that second vector, which is the same thing it's going to do for the PCA. So it's just going to keep rotating around and around and around that first vector until it maximizes this R squared. Then it rotates it and brings it into alignment with the first vector again. So now my second PLS vector has now been aligned with my first PLS vector. Then it goes back out and it's just going to run it again, another PCA space, same thing. It's going to rotate around and around and around until it maximizes the U space. Again, maximizes the R squared. So it's going to go out and find as many of those vectors as it can. And eventually it's going to run out of things that will help predict, right? And then so it's going to stop. So it finds 2, 3, 4 components. It's going to find those components in the PLS space and rotate them around. So the same math we use for PCA, except now we're going to double check how well is that predicting my Y. So if it's not helping, so in the background, it finds the first PCA component and it goes, how well did it predict? Boss, it kind of sucked it. Oh, okay. Well, let's go back out and move it a little bit. Did it help it? Nope. Did it help it? Yes. Okay. I'm going to keep rotating in that direction until I get a better fit. Until it maximizes this fit, it's going to fit a PCA component and keep rotating it until it actually finds a direction that actually helps it. But it has to start somewhere. So it just finds the first PCA vector. You could always find a PCA vector. And it just goes from there. And then once it defines a space by going back and going, okay, how far along? Oh, that's not helping because these dots will be random. And eventually they're going to align. When they align, as it gets better and better, it's going to overshoot, of course, and then it's going to come back again. So it's going to iterate, overshoot, and then it's going to come back again. So eventually, just by sheer computational power and iteration that a computer allows, it's found. There's no Nothing more than that. So it just finds the first PCA, rotates that until it finds the best fit. Once that's locked in, it will then go around. Remember how we found the second component was finding the second most amount of variation. It will then go around, my first finger pointing up, my second finger rotates around like we did last week. It's just going to do that again until it finds that second vector, which then helps drive this to become better at predicting. When it finds that, great, it's going to rotate that, and now it's aligned, and then it goes back out and finds the third component, and then finds a fourth and a fifth. However many PLS vectors there are, it's going to find. And that's all it ends up doing. It just sticks them all into the same direction for interpretation. So it's pretty cool, allows for easy interpretation, but it's just pure iterative power. There's no other way to describe it. It tries to come up with some fancy words and ways to explain it, but it's iterative. It's dumber than a box to rocks. It's just going to find the best orientation and go with it, and by following simple rules. So you find that first component, and then what's nice is we then have that second component now. So once I've found all the vectors that will help predict, eventually it's going to stop helping, right? Because that's what they're saying here a moment ago. Eventually, if I keep adding too many vectors, eventually I'm going to start fitting noise, right? Because we had that R square Q square situation. So the same thing is going to happen here. I'm eventually going to fit more than I should. I have overfit my model. Okay. And so eventually it will overfit, and it's going to go, oh, I'm not predicting any better. So I'm going to stop like 2 ago or 1 ago, whatever the algorithm dictates. Okay. And so it's going to stop predicting. Once it started fitting noise, you're going to start seeing the predictive capability, or the alignment here is going to go back the other way. So it remembers two or three times ago it was the lowest it could be. So we're not in a maxima or minima, at local maxima or minima. It's going to go back to that other one and call it done. Okay, again, just pure raw computational power. A computer is incredibly fast, right? Billions of calculations a second. So we're just going to harness that ability. Okay, there is no real intelligence other than the rules designed to find the vectors. So don't really try not to overthink it. That's OPLS in a nutshell. All right, and then what we can take advantage of once that first vector has been found, okay, it is now basically all the information has been rotated. So then we're left with a pure PCA space. So now we can find orthogonal components. Okay, so what else is happening in my data? So now I have my original vector. What else is happening in my data? What other relationships are found there? Okay, so all the vectors all the information, that vector has now been able to predict what else is going on. Okay, and so that can be re-illustrated with, I have my predictor value. So here's my score, and here's my Y predict. There's my first vector. Boom. I now have my second, third, fourth, fifth components, and they're not predicting worth a squat because they're not meant to. They should not be predicting anything at all. So I can find other things going on in my data space. So this comes back to, I can monitor my process here, right? So as long as this data structure is the same, if I run a simple PCA on the other space, right, I then have a monitoring model while I'm predicting at the same time. So my prediction has to be good, and my additional monitoring space also has to be correct. You get a 2-for-1. I forget what the analogy is for dodgeball. Darn it. Two for one switcheroo. Is that what it is? I forget what it is. All right. So another way to think of it, if I have a treatment here from left to right, so I have a 0 and a 1, I can see whether the gender had any sort of an effect. So if all the women and men are separated, that means that the treatment did not have any effect on the men or the women, or being male or female didn't affect the way the treatment was taken. So we can start to look for different groupings and things on those lines. So there was one study a number of years ago for a cholesterol lowering drug. It turned out that it actually killed Asian people. Didn't really like Indian folk, but African Americans, it freaking was awesome. Didn't do anything for white folk. And that was found out by looking at the other metadata. which is now one of those big words used today. We looked at all those secondary IDs, and we were able to color and identify that, oh, yeah, this is only really working for African Americans, but the other ones, it turned out there was the pathway that was affected, there was a genetic difference. And so if you're African, so now, if, in words, I forget the drug. If you take the drug, you have to get tested to make sure you don't have one of those other gene defects. It actually did kill a couple of people. They just didn't know what was going on. I'm not sure of the pathways, but that were used. Well, there's just some fun things. So I can find a thing that I never would have thought of, a drug that actually helps African Americans reduce their cholesterol by a tremendous amount, extremely effective. And then they figured out, oh, wait a minute, this is what happens. So now there's a whole new class of cholesterol lowering drugs. I forget what they're called. And they're all out there, and they're all dialed into individuals. So if you're like Samoan, or you're Inuit, or whatever that is over there up in Alaska, you have different drugs specific for your condition, assuming the regular drugs don't work, which sometimes they don't. Statins don't always work for people, things on those lines. Anywho, so there's another use case, a couple of ideas thrown at you, same one reiterated a few times. So our goal here is we're going to go out and collect data in a new X space, right? So we're going to collect that new X. We're going to go ahead, come over here. We're going to take that score, predict it, generate that new Y as that U is prediction. That U is just an offset from the original Y space, right? And so we're going to be left with a new prediction for the Y. In this case, it's going to turn out to be a 33.9 is going to be the prediction of the Y space for that particular API, so active pharmaceutical ingredient. So all we're going to do is, this is exactly what you want to do. I now have my new, that old model that was asked about earlier. I'm going to have that old model is right here. I'm going to introduce that new Y. I'm going to predict against that space what the score is going to be. I'm going to take that score. I'm going to go back to that regression line we just calculated. Go back, figure out that U, which is just the offset from the center point, right? Of my Y space. That's just going to come over here. I have to just backtrack against my space again, and then boom, there I go. I don't know why they have that offset. The Y space will only have a single vector in it, so I don't understand why they have the offset there, but that's not there. Oops, wrong way. And so what's nice now is we can actually have, because we do have the ability to predict an actual value. So we have diastolic blood pressure actually does have a value. We can predict how well that value works. And so we can then come into doing some predictions. So we're on slide 31. I don't know why this is, I don't know. So slide 31, the predictive loading, so I can see age is helping me because I now actually can see how well age is actually helping me predict. I can see my systolic, high density lipoprotein, triglycerides, cholesterol, body mass index. Physiotherapy test value isn't doing jack for me. So I can see these are the values that are helping me. I'm trying to go back to here. So my physiotherapy, my age, and my systolic blood pressure. So if you remember those rules of cosine we talked about a little while ago, I think it was last week, I can use that same rule here. So this now becomes your new 1. So this is what, about 6/7 of the way out there. So I'm going to lose about 15%, so 85% of my systolic blood pressure multiplied by the cosine of that angle, which is really, really tiny, is going to help explain what's going on here. Age is roughly halfway down, and so roughly half of my age is going to be loaded in. Physiotherapy is also about half, but it's also at a 45-degree angle, so about 0.7 times 0.5 or 0.4 or 0.38 or something like that is going to be the physiotherapy contribution. If I use the same cosine and angle rule, cholesterol ain't telling me nothing. If I go back here, triglycerides is negatively loaded ever so slightly, but at angle is almost 90 degrees. So that's not going to be telling me anything. Same thing for the body mass, test value, high density lipoprotein. So these are really not helping me at all in understanding what's happening. In my diastolic, these 3 are, because they're close, and we can see that they would actually be positively loaded just by looking at the angles and the calculations based upon this becoming the new Y. New 1. All right. So we can see again the ones that are not helping us. So we're confident that the high density lipoprotein is not helping us. We're confident triglycerides really isn't doing anything for us. Cholesterol isn't really helping us. Body mass index is actually helping me explain what's going on. Physiotherapy just a little bit, and test value is not helping me at all. Sorry, these are all not helping us. And something to note, cholesterol isn't helping on either axis. Right. So cholesterol isn't helping us at all. We might want to look at getting rid of cholesterol altogether because it's not helping us at all. So that's another way to look at whether we want to keep variables or get rid of them is are they actually helping us predict our Y, and are they, useful in our other spaces, other directions? And we'll look at that. There's the VIP and other tools which combine these thought processes together. All right, so how do we determine the number of components, blah, blah, blah. I don't get into these pictures. So the same value that we had before of R square and Q square calculated the exact same way, except now we can actually go back and calculate how well we can actually fit it back to our original Y space. So we actually do have the ability to be a little bit better because we're not just looking at how well the data is related to itself, we're looking at how well the data can predict something. So we actually do have the ability to try to improve our prediction capability a bit. So usually anything above a half is good. Don't tie yourself to any particular value as long as it gets the job done. Don't let perfection get in the way of good enough. Can't stress that enough. And 0.9 or higher is usually for like spectroscopy or a very well-defined or well-understood process where you already bringing in just the right number of variables and everything else. You'll normally get 0.9 right off the bat. So those are typically your older processes, machinery-based stuff. You'll see really nice values brought in because, again, it's already been figured out over the years. Now, remember, the R square is always going to be higher than the Q squared because there's a 6/7 rule. We do want to have a higher R squared than and a higher Q square, and the difference cannot be too large. About 0.3 is a maximum differential you want. Moving into the OPLS space, 0.2 is more common, so 0.2 to 0.3 would be the max you'd want to try to have a separation between the R square and the Q square. And there's a way to test for the number of components, so you don't have to just use the R square and the Q square. So what we do here, I should probably put this into Excel and run it as a macro. If I fit just a single component, this model's not overfit. I'm not describing any noise. Here's my original data space right here. That's that dot. And here is the model when I scramble around the Y values. I don't think is that in the next slide? No, they don't have that. All right. So what you end up doing Okay. So I have run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I have N. And then here I have 8. That could be 8. Why not? That has to be 9. 9, 8. Okay. So here is my original values, and this is going to be my permutated. We do perm 1, I have like perm 2. So what I'm going to do is on my original, this is my X data. This is my original Y. This is going to be my permutation 1. This would be perm 2. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these values here, and I'm going to scramble them. So I'm taking the exact same values here, but now this is going to have to be, let's say, 3, 4, 7, 8. That can't be 2, so it has to be 1, 5. Let's see, 9. I'm missing a 6 and a 5. So what I've done is now I've created a fake or simulated Y space. Now the Y space is the same size as the original Y. I've just taken I've taken the exact same values that were here, and I've scrambled them. So 1 should predict 7, 2 should predict 5, 3 should predict itself, 4 would predict 6. Now I'm asking this original X space to predict not the original Y, but predict a scrambled Y. So I'm taking the same values. I'm asking it to predict itself. Now what I should get is a bunch of crap. If my models fit correctly, it's going to come out as garbage. And that's exactly what this is saying. So I'll do 100 iterations. I'll take those numbers in that permutation. I'll permutate them 100 times. I'll create 100 little models. I'm going to test to see if one component is going to be a good fit for me. One model here, actually one PCA in this case actually fits the model extremely well. Wonderful. It should, because we're using the OPLS model. Okay, so the first component should be really, really nice. But now I want to see if I can start getting some monitoring accomplished at the same time. So I'm looking for here is now I can see there's some divergence here in the slopes of these two lines. And there's rules here. Okay, so the R square should be crossing over at less than 0.3 and the Q square should be less than 0.05. So as long as those two lines are less than 0.3, not 3, but here. So if I fit 2 components, I can see I'm still able to get a secondary, I can get some extra work out of my model, right? And I'm still able to get a good prediction because I can still predict my Y's just fine. I'm able to get a little bit of extra work. Now when I get over to 3, I can see here that I'm missing these values completely. I'm at 0.6 here and I'm at like 0.3 for my crossovers for the Y-axis. So I've overfit my model. I've collected too much noise. This is no longer acceptable. And of course, in clearly 4, I've accepted way too much noise. So this is just it's a permutation test. It's unique to Simca. Allows us to quickly determine whether my original model that I'm trying to predict is it actually overfit. In other words, can I randomly take data that was from the same Y space and randomize it and get the same responses? Yeah, pretty much all the time here. With 4, like 65% of the time I'll get it here. Maybe 20% or less, so less than 0.3, I'm going to get it over here. So we can actually, again, get some extra work out of here and still make some good prediction models. So this is called a permutation test. This is a quick way to test whether you've overfit your model or not. And this is really all we're judging it against, is how well it can predict. And there's your values right here. The prediction test is going to be what we use quite a bit. I hate it for many, 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 many reasons, but it's very useful and most people just gravitate towards it. And so again, your goal is to try to explain it to other people. Just because Art Handful doesn't like it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. Just I don't like it. I'd rather use other tools. Somebody trying to come into the meeting? People are waiting at the lobby.
Yeah, Ben
okay.
kicked out and back in.
Okay. I missed him leaving. So here we'd have the Y versus the Y predicted versus the original value. No, the original versus the predicted. There we go. And so what we're looking for here is if we withheld spectra or withheld observations, that's going to be your prediction data set. So the goal here is this is in the number of units. This is millimeters of mercury. So I can predict with this model to within 4.3 millimeters of mercury as the diastolic blood pressure. If that meets your need, stick a fork in yourself, you're done. Okay. If it doesn't, then you might want to go back and try to figure out what else is going on. Now, something else to keep in mind is your root mean square error of prediction. That's what that means. Root mean square error of prediction is going to also include the reference technique and any issues associated with that or the analytical errors. So if I have a 3% error associated with my measuring system, I'm not going to do better than 3% in my prediction because it's relayed back to the errors associated with the process. The measuring process, not the process itself. Sorry, misspoke there. So that's about all we can ever do is get back to the original error. Now, in reality, you can do better. I actually tried to publish a paper on it, but my company wouldn't let me publish it. So I've proven mathematically that you can do better, and it's been shown by a number of people that you can do better than the original space. And you can build a better model than the original space. And I can show you how to do that. I'm happy to. Okay, it's not hard. So we actually can predict a model that's better than your analytical technique that you're measuring against. You actually can do that. They tell you you can't, but I'm just telling you you can. I can show you how to do that. All right. So that's the ultimate goal we're trying to get to here is make these predictions. We use the same scores plot, same D mod X, all that fun stuff that we've already done, and we're all finished. So you guys have been positively talking, so I'm going to assume no word is good word. We're going to come back to the this is particle size.
Ben's having issues. We're trying to get him back in the room.
Oh, what's going on with him?
I'm not sure.
Is he at home or
Probably
something?
headset.
It's just his headset?
Yeah, he's been having problems with his headset. So.
Or his computer could have completely rebooted. It's hard to say. He's had a few issues with long Teams meetings here in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, well, welcome to Microsoft. I throw them under a bus a lot because I see enough in my lifetime. We're trying to let him back in. Let's see what's going on. Come on. There he is.
Are you
there
back?
He is. That's not very encouraging.
Yeah, hold on. We're trying to catch him on Teams.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
On my laptop. Sorry, I had a call from Eastman that I had to take, and I couldn't get it reconfigured because they were calling through Teams as well. I'm back though.
All right. So we're back to the healthcare. I'm just going to open this up. It's really quick. Let's go ahead and create a new model. We're going to do a regression model. Okay, so we're just going to click on there. You notice it opens up a couple of different windows. Not quite sure. We're just going to reset that again. There we go. So in the variables tab right here, we're going to click on that. We're going to select the diastolic, and we're going to create that as the Y. So we have X, X, Y, X, 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 X. Okay. And the observations, we're going to keep all the observations for now. And we're going to click on the finish. So now we have an OPLS model. It has 57 observations we're going to try with 9 different variables, 8 of them being X, 1 of them being a Y. They're all going to be UV scaled. So if this is where we want to change the scaling. OPLS, we're going to auto fit. Why not? Okay, we're going to click on finish. Now it's going to yell at us because this observation is containing a boatload of the X block. Do we want to exclude it? Yes, we do. This one's also, this one's now missing 100% of the Y block. Kind of need the Y block in order to predict, right? So we can't use that one right now to predict what the Y would be. So do we wish to exclude it? Yes, we are going to exclude it. Observation 32 also is containing. So okay, this is going to be the second one. Okay, I have 2 Ys that are missing. And I had an X that was missing. So I started with 57, and I'm now down to 54. And it's going to go ahead and auto fit that X OPLS model. And if you're lucky like me, you have an unpredicted error. So my system decided to up and crash on me. So I'm going to have to wait a moment while this decides to do that, which good. It decided to kill itself early. Save early, save often. because that happens all the time. So we're going to go back to opening OPLS. We'll try to recover it. Sure. There we go. I'm going to auto fit it. There we go. So now I have auto fit. I have an OPLS model. I have one predictor, two secondary orthogonal. So there's two things going on in the orthogonal space. I have 54 observations. Now this is hard. I just worked with somebody who proclaimed to be a Simca expert, and I had to explain to her she got it wrong. So I'm going to go real slow here. This is the amount of the X space. I'm using 69.3. Again, I know it's not correct. 69.3% of my X space. I can explain 77% of my Y space, and I can reproduce 67% of my Y space. This Q square is related to the Y squared. What's happening is she was getting 0.9 here and like 0.9 here. Is confused how the Q square was higher than the R square, and I can understand the confusion because it doesn't really, if you don't know off the surface of it, it's not clear or evident. But she was using the wrong interpretation to make model decisions and stuff, and so it just really got messed up. It spiraled out of control because as you add and remove observations, as you add and remove variables, these will flip-flop all over the place. And so she was kind of going around and around and around. She had 150 something models built on one single data set because she was following the rules wrong. So I had to very politely instruct her how to do it correctly. So again, X space explaining the Y space, this is related to here. I told them I should put a Q2Y in there now just to make it clear we're looking at the Y variable. All right, so we're able to repredict fairly well. So what we would do is we would look at our loadings and our scores, and we go ahead and we plot them out. And we can see here now that we have our healthcare scores are now over here. These are now the loadings. And so this score space is now aligned with this new loading space. So these scores are now aligned from left to right, lower on the left and higher on the right for our diastolic blood pressure. So if I come back to the score plot, I can now color by my diastolic blood pressure. And I can see that indeed the lower ones are on the left, the higher ones are on the right. And we found that by trying to see what variations are explaining what's going on here with the diastolic blood pressure. All right, so that's what we can do here. We can do the observed versus predicted, so of course that makes sense. We can also add more components. So if I add more components, I'm just going to go ahead and this will eventually get wonky. So we can start seeing the predictions are getting a little crazy because if I then come to the Analyze tab, if I come to that permutation test here, we can recalculate. I will leave them alone. There we go. So this is doing that permutation. It's actually not doing so bad, but it's 0.3 and 0.05, so we're still doing okay. Eventually it will run out. R squared, it's 0.2. Yep, we're doing fine. So apparently that model is still valid. It's really not. Because we can see here the prediction is all over the map. So here we're looking for the width. So if we go back to the auto fit, it's not much better because the data really isn't that super great, 0.67.
Can you explain the A variable in the project window, 1 + 2 + 0?
Yep. So we have the first predictor, which we would get from the orthogonal partial least squares. We have two PCA vectors around it, so two orthogonal vectors. And then the 0 here is if you have more than one Y, or if you have a Y that is extremely highly correlated, it can actually go back and predict some of the X space. So that happens a lot. Spectroscopy, some processes, just having, so if my Y was extremely highly correlated with one or two or three variables inside my X space, it's possible that if I knew the Y, I could predict some of the X variables because they're just that highly correlated. That's what that means. It means that you have something, we have a really highly correlated Y variable to something in your X space. And so we want to go figure out what's going on. So that's like another diagnostic. Can my Y space can one variable predict something in my X space? So if that pops up as a 121 or 111 or 101, that means there's something really weird going on in there. We've got to go back and check it out.
Okay.
Very rarely happens. You think it happens more often than it doesn't. It very rarely happens, but that's what that means. We showed you how to use the permutation test. Yep, there's your observed versus prediction. Coefficients. We can talk about those real quick. So these are the coefficients. So age is positively loaded. So the higher age, the higher your diastolic blood pressure is going to be. We can tell right here is for explaining diastolic blood pressure. So it's always listed in the title. Your systolic blood pressure is helping us explain positively. There's one negative one here. Cholesterol. So the higher your cholesterol, the lower your diastolic blood pressure, but we're uncertain as to the direction and we're uncertain as to the intensity of that vector because the uncertainty associated with that variable is larger and overlaps the vector here. So we're not sure. Same thing with triglycerides. It's assumed to be slightly positive, but we really don't know because the uncertainty associated with triglycerides is just ridiculously huge compared to its contribution. So body mass index, same thing. And physiotherapy number barely hits positive. So remember that's the 0.19 there, 0.2. And test value is not doing jack for us. We don't know anything. So we could get rid of the variables here that are not very high. We can just right click as Jim pointed out. We can sort these like ascending. So the lower ones will be on the left, the higher ones will be on the right. You can also sort descending, it doesn't really matter. So I normally do descending personally. So this would be the most important positively loaded. This is going to be the most important negatively loaded. And then we can see which ones are also happening. Those are just the coefficients. That's not taking into account like that market cap that we spoke about. So if we want to take into account both, we have the VIP. Okay, so we have the VIP in total. So we can look at which ones are contributing. So basically these are all I think you square the value, so these are all just going to all automatically end up being positive. So we can see test value in overall space isn't telling us anything at all. We don't need it to be included at all. And the other VIP to use is the VIP for the prediction. So which variables are actually
real quick, couple things. One is, what is the test value? Why do you say that it's not helping you? One, and then two, what is like on the left side, the y-axis scaling is like minus 0.5 to 2.5. What exactly is that? What is that number?
Let's see. So the test value is not significant because the values are over, the uncertainty associated with the test value is greater than its expected contribution. So therefore, this is an insignificant term. It's not
okay.
helping us predict our diastolic.
So can you hover over that and it tells you that? Is that?
Nope.
Is it just more of your eyeballing it?
No, we can see. No, we can see. Maybe it's not clear.
I mean,
there's a bar here and a bar here. So this is just the uncertainty is greater than the
I can see it on that one, but some of the others it may not be so obvious. That's my point.
Well, these are all
like BMI. It may not be quite so obvious. It looks like the.
It's totally fine. It's totally fine. It's usable.
I got you.
That's for the overall X space, though. That's for the overall space. Well, I think what you're trying to dig at is what I'm going to show here in a moment. If I come to the VIP, there's also the predictive components. Now, we don't have uncertainty associated with these, but these are what's actually predicting my diastolic blood pressure. And anything less than a half, it will say right here, anything less than a half, it's unimportant. So all these right here are not helping us understand what's happening with our diastolic blood pressure. So there's two views. So if I'm doing like a monitoring model, I'd want to do the total space. And if I'm just doing a prediction model, I'd want to do the predictive components, because the predictives will get rid of the extra space that we don't need. And if we're doing the total, these are going to be all the ones that we need to keep in our model to make sure that our we have a monitoring model and we have a prediction model. The monitoring model is going to need to include components or variables that are not necessarily contributing, but are important to understanding what's happening in the space. We still need to groom those to get rid of values that are just useless. So if test values come in and they're all over the place and are not helping us predict anyway, I'm not going to include it in a prediction, in a monitoring model. I'm definitely not going to include it in a prediction model because it's just not going to, it's going to kick out a D mod X error that I don't need. It's just not helping at all. So let's just get rid of it. It's just not needed. But then if I look at it for a prediction, clearly the test value isn't predicting because it's less than a half. That's just the rule. If it's less than a half, it's not contributing. I don't know what the scale means. I have to go back and actually read it or go back and, I have to go through the help file
Okay.
myself.
Well, we can read that. I just didn't know if you knew it offhand.
Nope, I don't. And I'm not. Yeah, I'm not trying to sound like maybe I came across. I don't know what it means. I know how to interpret it.
Right. Well, I just
again,
that's
I
one of
don't
those the customer will ask you, well, what does that 2 mean over there? And I'm like, that's I can just hear a customer.
Well, it's more important than the age.
Yeah.
It's all proportional.
Yeah, I know.
But ultimately, I don't really remember.
That's all right. We can find that. It's not that important. It's to your point. From an interpretation standpoint, yes, systolic blood pressure matters way more than anything else, and so therefore that's what we're like honing in on. But I can just hear somebody saying, "Well, what does 2 mean? Does that mean twice as much?" I mean, I can hear all the questions coming.
These are proportional.
Right.
So there's not always going to be a 2. We'll see that later. There could be a 17 and they're all going to lay off, but the rule of thumb is anything under a half is just not significant. So VIP larger is greater than 1 is important, less than a half is unimportant. The intervals between 1 and a half is a gray area where the importance depends on the size of the data set. So it's going to come down to, this is a small data set, so I'm going to keep as much as I can. If it's a larger data set, I can start to, and I have more variables, I'm going to have a more wiggly area. And you're also then going to compare it against your coefficients. So if I go ahead and I plot, let's just do this. There we go. So here's the VIP for everything. Here's a VIP for prediction. And here is the first component, I believe. Yeah. So here's what's predicting my diastolic blood pressure is my systolic. My age is helping predict. There's my age, and here's my age. Third one's my physiotherapy. Here's my physiotherapy. Fourth positive is high-density lipoprotein, which is right here. Now, if I'm trying to predict my diastolic blood pressure, which is what this is also predicting, it's telling me I don't need that high-density lipoprotein. I don't need my triglycerides. I don't need my test value, and I don't need my cholesterol. Body mass index, though, is on the cusp of helping me explain what's going on. So it's right on that edge. And so it's easier to keep it than get rid of it. And so that comes right down here. So here's your coefficients plot. Here's how it's calculated. I was going to say, no, you kind of stole my thunder a touch. I really don't let the math get in the way. I just try to interpret it and just when I have to go back and figure it out, I go back and I figure it out. I don't.
That's the way I've been too. I just didn't know if that was something I should know or we should know. So you're kind of keeping me over the target as to what's really important.
I try. I'm just that weird guy. So we have the D mod X, and of course we have your hoteling. So again, we can look quickly at our predictive space. The same rules here apply, so nothing sticks out like a sore thumb here. So we're all good. Oops. Let's see, predict. So what we could do here in the predict tab is we were talking a little bit before. So we come to data set, we have the healthcare. I can repredict the entire data set. So that's going to be 57 observations. I only have 54 here. Okay, so these are missing. Do I want to exclude these? No, I want to keep everything. And so now I have 57 in my data set here. So I'm repredicting the ones that were excluded before. And I can come back in here and look at my values here. And I can come back here, look at my scores, and I can see that some of those are not sticking out too far. I can look at my D mod X. Did anything really stick out? Nope. My hoteling? Nope. So even though some of those didn't have any values, we went ahead and we were able to fill in those values and use them anyways. So, pretty cool. Now, one way to test, if you really want to know which observations were included or excluded, if we come back to the home, there is a predict tab. We could predict as the complement. So the 3 that were removed, okay, we can go ahead and just predict those. That's the complement. So that was removed because it was missing values. Do we want to exclude it? No. And there we go. So those are the 3 that were excluded, and we can see how well that was predicted. There was no calculation available because we didn't have the Y values, right? And so here's those 3 values according to the X space. Here's our hoteling, and here's a D mod X. So if we were able to create accurate predictions and such, which we were, we predicted a Y value here of 0.325. I guess there was not enough data here to make a, there's our diastolic prediction, 81, 97, and 99. It couldn't calculate these because there wasn't enough. We were missing all the variables. So like I said, anything more than 50 is a problem. So we were missing 75%, so we couldn't make the predictions. So there we go. So that's predicting with the complement. So those that we removed, those are the ones we don't want. We can, or we couldn't use in the X space. We can use those, or in the Y space, we can use that. We can hit the analyze again. We can come back, look at the permutation, CANOVA. There's a lot of other stuff in here that I normally don't use. The only one that might be fun to try would be the biplot. Again, this helps us understand the relationship here that's going on. So we can see some of those observations that are really close to certain variables. That's interesting to see. There is the inner relationship plot. So this is our U versus our T. So this is our score, and this is our U space. So that's the actual curve that's being fit. So if I right click and hit the plus button, that's going to be equal to the regression line. That's 76 is going to be that value right there. So this is the exact line that we were trying to fit before. I'm trying to go out that corner and I can't get it. Come here. Yeah, pain in the butt. It's really not liking me. Not as bad as Ben's computer. So there's that space right here. I'm not sure what the SUS plot is. Yeah, that's the DA plot. What is the S plot? I can't remember. There's no advisor for this window. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. That doesn't help me. So I can't help you by reading that real quick. So here's the VIP. Also from the analyze, again, we can see, I guess, the same values as before. Now, something you might be asked every once in a blue moon to do is a hierarchical design. We can base it upon the score values. So here we can see how many different family trees exist. So if we're predicting a Y, you can also do it for the PCA space. So right here, there's 2 main families. We have the green here and the blue. If I draw the line through that line, I can come down here. There's 3 main families right here. So there's family A, family B, family C, way over to here. If I come down here, there's going to be 4 families. 1, 2, black. The black then turns into red and yellow. And then you can keep cutting these into smaller and smaller trees. This will then tell you where they belong in each of the different families. And so sometimes you are asked to create those plots. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if I do the score plot, yep. My score plot will now be represented by the different HCA values. So these are where each of these different families would split themselves according to the HCA rules, which is not something we typically get into, but you may be asked to with your line of work. I have a spring and a fall rotation. I have high, medium, low concentrations. I have different whatever. So we can start to see maybe do the patterns actually flesh out on the screen? Do they belong in their own group? So what we could do is end up just taking like this whole group and create a PCA just on that space here. Same thing, same thing, same thing. So these are not truly independent, and that's what they talk about over here. These are not their own true independent spaces, but for all intents and purposes, you could make 4 separate models in the PCA or in this case PLS space to try to understand exactly what's going on. So I could build a model for the higher end, model for the middle, model for the middle lower, and model for the lower values if we wanted to do that. So what you could do is you can build one overall model. You can then predict where it's going to land and then load another model to then do a more accurate prediction. Happens all the time. That's why I'm pointing it out to you. It's in the Analyze tab is under HCA. So how many different populations reasonably exist? So if I pick 3, high, medium, low, high, low. So these, see the high, low isn't right down the middle, right? So these are higher than that one over here. These are 3 here. And if I come here, I then have 4. I can then come here and then have, I think 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in this case. So it just helps you identify where you are. This is looking at score 1. I think if I go to score 2, you had the last score. So I only have the 1 because it's a OPLS. So those would be the different groupings you could create. So if your process is running and you're running, compound A high, compound A low, compound B high, B low, C high, C low, you could load a better prediction if you wanted to, potentially. There should be a justification for doing that. And we can read up about PLS trees, but basically it's just what I explained, just how many groups can we create that are separate from each other. So again, just because they're in 2-dimensional space doesn't mean that they're not actually separated within 3-dimensional space. So if I rotate that to 3, I'm sure there's an orientation here. It looks like it's right in this general direction. I don't know, we'll find it. There would be a direction where we actually could align them all up, where you actually would be able to draw a line through, or in this case, a plane through each of these spaces. Whee! All right, I'm going to look at that picture again. That looked curious where that went. Yep, there we go. So one of these orientations here, we rotate it just right, it will pop out. I'm not going to do it all day. Just roll your mouse if you want to zoom in. It's there somewhere. All right. That was almost another hour and change. We got through the PLS. We can do the Champagne versus Cava if you want. I think we'll look to see what additional chapters we can start talking about some pre-processing. We have another 2:30 we're done? 3:30? 3. We're going to take a tiny break here. You guys want to think about what you might want to... Yeah, I know you're all in the same room.
No, actually, just Katie and I are in the same room. So.
Okay. But you guys, I'm going to take the headset off. You guys can figure out what you might want to see next. I would come back and I'd start getting into some of the pre-processing, some of those discussions. We can come back and look at the OPLS-DA separations. I just want to get into some of the pre-processing. We can load up a data set. I have like one from like Michigan State we can look at and start breaking down. Because I want to get through the trim, winds rising, and all that sort of stuff and show you where that is. And then we can get into like I said, Michigan State data set, show you what that looks like. And then we can talk about what and then we can talk about what else you might want to. If there's additional topic you'd like to do other than what I just discussed, or if you really want to get into those exercises, let me know. I'm happy to go either way, and the goal would be to try to get you guys into. I can't share the Michigan State data with you just yet. We're in the process of trying to publish it, so we can't give it away just now. I can go through it with you on the screen and show you how to think through it, and where the trim winds rising buttons are, what that would do, blah blah blah. I think that'd be useful use of our time. But definitely get through some of those pre-processing the trim winds rising. So I want to show you those in action. Those are very important for you and what you're doing. And then next week would be additional topics or fun stuff. So if there's something in particular you want, let me know. Let's come back 10 minutes. Does that work for everybody? Like 2:05?
Yeah, it should work. Why don't we just stick with your plan, and we can always come back to the exercises.
Sure.
Like even like week 1 exercises and week 3. You know what I mean? Oops, sorry.
Yep, that's totally fine. Let's do 14:07. There we go. So 7 after the hour, we'll come on back. And I'm going to be away from the keyboard. When I come back, I'll delete that out. All right. If you have a question, I'll be here for another minute or so, but I've been sitting in a chair like you guys for a while, so I just got to get up and move. See you again soon.
I miss much in there.
What's up, Ben?
Oh, I was going to ask the other guys at least if I missed much when I was out.
You missed everything, and it's a shame you weren't here. What did you remember you saw last?
No, I think I got the general gist of what we were doing. I think I got it all.
You probably did, Ben. I've talked to you. You're pretty on point. Knowing Jim and the rest of you guys, you all are. But you probably got it. Again, the whole takeaway is don't overthink it. If you're thinking when you go into this, you've already lost. Just let the data flow and just kind of use some general rules to guide you. Interpretation is more important than understanding exactly what you're doing. You can always go to the help files. You can always look that stuff up. It's actually, a lot of it is in Wikipedia, believe it or not. If it's not in the advisor window, it's going to be something you can reference or readily available publications out there. I never let it get in my way. I actually made that comment. You may have heard it. I don't let math get in the way. I know how to use a tool. I know how to interpret.
That's where I want to.
So I think you're fine. Yep. All right. I'll see you guys in a little bit.